This is my four-part final project for the Technology Instruction for Linguistically and Culturally Diverse Learners, and this is my project by Kate Reno. For part one, I chose a lesson involving the technology that is Plickers. Plickers is a system where each kid gets a printout of a QR-like code, and then using the app on your phone or device, you can scan the answers depending how they hold them up. I believe there's 4 options, and then get students feedback instantaneously with a little bar graph and feedback as to how on point they are. I used Plickers for what I like to call a this or that food option choice. First, students created or compared 3 like foods and compared their caloric, fat, and saturated fat information. Once they created a slide showing images, they also had to create the slide with that previously mentioned information to prove the correct answer, which is the healthiest option. And so we would present the first slide of images. Kids would hold up their Plicker cards. I'd walk around the room with my phone. I would have them guess as a group what they thought the correct answer was. I would then tell them what they chose as a class as the correct answer. And then we would go over the text information about which was the healthiest food choice, and then go back to our Plickers discussion on whether we were accurate as a class or not and why that was. The use of this technology wasn't super challenging, but there was a lot of downtime in trying to scan the room and pick up all the little different Plickers cards that kids held up, as well as prompting the kids to hold up the cards and actually make a decision and stick to it. Some were faster than others, some we had to wait for to get the whole group response. Sometimes my phone didn't pick up all the Plickers cards, and then the other downside is that I tried to offer up to the kids to, here's my phone, you can be the one to scan it and see how this works. But ultimately they turned me down on that offer, and I always had the technology in my hand. And I felt like perhaps to them holding up just a piece of paper wasn't always that exciting, or the excitement wore off as the lesson went on. In the future, I gave the kids actually only a minimum of 2 choices they needed to use, and most of them created 3 different food options to choose from. I believe Plickers, you can rotate that square for different answer possibilities for choices. So perhaps since I set the bar at 2, the kids exceeded my expectations and gave me 3 options, I would actually up it to 4 different food comparisons and the information with it. Also, I had printed the Plickers on regular old computer paper, and I had laminated a set. The laminating created some kind of glare where they never picked up with the phone app, so I went to my backup set of just computer paper, which got beat up as the day went on. So using some cardstock to have a sturdier Plickers card to last throughout the day and for multiple lessons in years to come would be an easy change. In terms of ELL students and focusing in on them, this hits the language of health. There are the reading and writing domains that are incorporated as students have to search to find and interpret and read the nutritional information, and then type, or the closest thing to writing in terms of technology, their slides up. And this also has assessment potential in terms of assessing how much kids know in terms of specific vocabulary like calories, fat, saturated fat, percent daily values. Due to this assessment potential, this relates to the previous class in the ELL endorsement sequence, where it focuses on different means of assessing your ELL students and how this Plickers assignment, while used for the class's benefit, could also be a tool in which I informally or formally assess students individually or as a group, depending on how in depth I would want to go in the future. For part 2 of this assignment, I used Today's Meet, which is an interactive online message board, if you will, similar to Padlet, which I've used in the past. I use this as I start all my health classes with a journal assignment, and instead of kids writing their journal like they did before we went one-to-one with Chromebooks, or now typing in an ongoing Google Doc, kind of a running stream of consciousness health journal, I figured this would be a more natural way for kids to share. Instead of me putting them on the spot, they do a quick, succinct journal, kind of almost like a Twitter-like response with 140 characters or less, and then it jumps onto the projected screen at the front of the classroom for kids to see their response as well as their peer responses as they come in. Many of my students have used Padlet in the past, so they were kind of familiar with this twist on it with Today's Meet. However, they had never used this specific technological tool, so it was nice to see them use previous technology skills. Since students had that familiarity with Padlet, they could transfer their skills from the use of that technology tool to using today's Meet as well. My students greatly appreciated this option of journaling because it was quick and easy to set up and for them to use. They enjoyed seeing responses pop up, and you could kind of see a visceral body language kind of reaction as more similar responses were coming up that kids were on the right track. I like it because it allows me to access prior knowledge as well as fill in any missing background knowledge on the topic at hand. And depending how on or off track students respond to the given prompt, it allows me to tailor my class to their responses, whether I need to review more or whether we know the topic and we can go at a more challenging level and more in depth on it. This also, again, addresses the language of health in terms of WIDA and allows for students down the road to potentially use Google Translate depending on their ELL needs. And I would want to look into whether today's Meet or some other similar site like Padlet could allow for image, GIFs, or even some kind of voice recording, depending on whether their reading, writing, listening, or speaking skills are stronger at the moment. This also hits the ISTE standard of digital citizenship and using some forms of media and social interactions responsibly, as clearly the entire class is going to see the response and it better be on track and appropriate. And it also hits Illinois State Learning Standard 23C.3a that has to do with relationships between the physical, social, and mental sides of a developing adolescent. For part 3, I observed a social studies teacher on my 6th grade team and her use of WeVideo with her specific class. Since our school is one-to-one with Chromebooks, WeVideo is an app on the Google deck of apps that is easiest to use. Before we were a purely Mac district, and it is essentially the Google equivalent of what used to be iTunes for Macs. Every year the social studies teacher does a project on the Iceman and an archaeological dig to find the Iceman, what that means in terms of significance for our history, what it means in terms of sourcing, and it's usually a written paper, very formulaic with guidelines and an outline for the kids to do. So she was trying to be more creative and let kids be more creative. So she tried out WeVideo for that project for kids to tell the story of the Iceman and complete that project in a different format. The project was a little wasteful, in my opinion, in terms of class time. WeVideo, one of its strengths is it operates like a Google Drive in that you can collaborate at home and work on similar parts at the same time. So to me, that means less time is needed in class and more of this can be done outside the classroom for homework, as kids all have access and shared access to the same project. It was super easy to draw parallels to kids' previous use of iMovie when they've had access to iPads and MacBooks in our district. The teacher also had really great handouts that gave screenshots of how to use the software. However, it was very step-by-step and almost too methodical, where kids know so much about technology and kind of can trial and error and figure things out. They don't necessarily need that step-by-step hand-holding. But what was really useful was the guidelines for filming and editing. That way kids weren't just goofing around, filming whatever, but they stayed on task and didn't need to do too much editing. It was more about the content, not all the little frills and interesting things you could do with the software. To make this project a little bit better even, I might allow X amount of edits or transitions because kids can get a little slap happy with those and put more in, just like we all can do with our projects and make slides and things, do all sorts of tricks that, while can enhance the visual presentation, aren't necessary. And as I previously mentioned, less time in class and more of this project at home where kids, once they've done the filming, I think the filming needs to be done in class, the editing can be done outside of the classroom. So this project hit the language of social studies, and in order to make this project even more doable for ELLs, I would provide those guidelines for filming and editing that were kind of screenshotted with even more simplified language. This project in general is good for all students because nothing written has to be turned in, it's all video. However, with that said, there's a lot of speaking and listening addressed with this project, and if a student's skills aren't strong there, it could be more difficult. So maybe the teacher could make a concession for a student to turn in some written dialogue or allow a student to have a writing or a piece of paper in front of them while they're delivering their lines to convey the material. Maybe they could even hold up images if they don't feel comfortable standing in front of a camera being recorded and not necessarily being able to accurately communicate their thoughts. Lastly, the greatest thing again about this project is that all kids have so much use of tech and familiarity with technology that ELL students, in my observations in this classroom, blended right in. You would never be able to tell who they were because they just knew how to use all the technology that their peers were using. Lastly, this teacher showed me how her curriculum aligned with her Common Core state standards and social studies learning standards. And to take it a step further, I looked at the ISTE standards, and this could be considered standard 6B amongst creative communicator, where students get to create their own original digital works. Lastly, for part 4, I found a new app called PicMonkey. It's very simply photo editing software. When I was using it, it reminded me a lot of what I've been told is Snapchat and all the filters and things you can do within that app. It's super simple to use. Kids already have familiarity with 101 other apps that allow them to edit and transform and put stickers and buttons and text on their pictures. And this is just taking that another step further in its own app format. Probably the next greatest positive of this is that there's just so many limitless possibilities for kids to play around with it and teachers to use it in terms of projects. The biggest negatives were it was limited in access in terms of features with the trial version I signed up for. And then perhaps a negative is it's too much like Snapchat and that kids have more familiarity with Snapchat and use that, so why use a different app when they already have their comfort level set with Snapchat. Since this is an image-based app, this could be used for all students, and especially ELLs, because it could provide them with a way for an alternative assignment using imagery. It could essentially make pictures into flashcards. It can reduce vocabulary and simplify thoughts and just to the images if students are lower on their access test scores for any of the writing, reading skills.